one of the reasons I became really interested in the area where my company is focusing is because I think in general, as we have become cyborgs, we're technology augmented beings. We're no longer just humans. Like our memories augmented by our phone, by the internet, by AI, by all of these things. I also think a second order consequence of that and of tracking and monitoring everything with sensors, which I think can be highly directionally useful. I think that on average, people are far less dialed into how do I actually feel, what's happening inside of my body, and how do I feel in reaction to the things that I'm doing every moment, day to day. And most people want like the magic bullet, like give me the pill, give me the thing, give me the device that's going to like flip the switch. And the reality is, I think real transformation happens when you become attuned to when I do thing X, what's the feeling I have in my body? And then as a consequence of that, how do I feel when I go train today? Or how emotionally present am I with the people who I value the most, or how am I able to think at work, like that type of thing. So I really think that interoception, the ability to sense what's going on inside our body and have somatic awareness, I really think that's the next frontier of high performance. And when I talk to people in sport and special warfare and all these other spaces, like that's the direction shit is moving, man.
And I mean, this is such a beautiful jumping off point into sort of one of the central premises of the book. But we're a hack obsessed society, biohacking. How do I optimize performance? And I see this all the time. And in the last section we talked about the men's work that I do, and it really came from my dear friend Kenny's. He's been a professional athlete coach. He coaches, executives and things like that. And really what it came back to was people were trying to change one aspect of their lives without looking at the entire ecosystem of it. So you're like trying to be a high performer in one area, but the actions in all the other areas are actually they're not in alignment with that at all, right? So as we start to understand what's happening internally, and then we start to reflect on that as external actions and how they're driving it, that's when we can really start to integrate the ecosystem. But if you're like, yo, man, I want to be the best basketball, and he'd train like basketball players, like NBA players and whatnot, and they're like, I want to be at the top of my game. And he's like, great. How many hours a night are you sleeping? And they're like, like 6. And he's like, okay, well, why are you sleeping 6 hours? Well, I was out at the club, and he's like, okay, great. What are you doing at the club? And they're like, I don't know. I had, 2, maybe 3 drinks. And you're like, okay, great. Like, when did you get home? Well, 4. You want to be the best you can be? You have to you need to back this way up. We're not even at the layup. Great. You've got a great build. You've got skills. You can't even, let's not even talk about the fucking layup until we're talking about how much sleep you're getting and who you're hanging out with. Right. And that was a huge aha moment for him, where you start talking about the integrated systems of wellness. But the truth is, a lot of people, when we measure stuff and in this augmented culture, we think that, okay, because I understand because I have the information about how I slept, that I'm somehow changing my pattern. No, it's just information, and it's not even good or bad. That's just a value application. All it is a metric, and you can keep track of all the metrics you want in the world. It doesn't make you any more optimized or better. If you're not activating on them, if you're not putting any of that information into motion, all it is gamified biometrics. That's it, anyway, sorry, that was really that's a diatribe, but I feel pretty strongly about this stuff.
Yeah. And you were talking about this in relation to, what happened to you as a total human in the process of writing this book. Because part of writing a book is you need to sit down for a long period of time, right, Cory?
Yeah. Well, as I started to, geez, oh man, Okay, I'll start by saying this. The book writing process took about 3 years. And for the beginning of that process, I was still very engaged with athletics, and I was doing a lot of high intensity training, so like CrossFit style stuff. And then I was getting a lot of exercise. Over time, that waned because my focus shifted into sitting and writing, and so a number of different, very specific things happened. Like my mobility went down, my hips tightened up, my blood flow decreases. Then there's a diet component that comes into it. You're just more sedentary. And then when I sold the book to Random House, in I think it was 2022. Yeah, it must no. I don't know. I think no, 2023. I I I was like, I'm not writing here at home in LA. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Europe and just sequester. And I stayed in this incredibly Spartan apartment. I mean, it was like a friend of a friend and they had this extra room in Salzburg, Austria. And it was, this is not glam living. I'm not like, I'm going to Europe to just like, this is like a Dostoevsky apartment. Like, it was all white. There was no art on the walls. There was a red couch, small red couch, and a lime green desk, or a white desk, and then a lime green sort of queen size bed. I didn't know how to turn the heat on, so I lived without heat in the winter. I could have asked. I was like, I just guess they don't have heat here. And I would get up every day and I would walk to the old city, the Altstadt, and then I would sit down and I would write. And about 2 or 3 o'clock, I'd order a beer and yes, that's right, I drink again. And I was smoking cigarettes. I just went full in. I went all in, and I just all of a sudden I came back and I had fallen out of my physical practice, and I just looked like I looked terrible. I looked terrible. I'd created something I was very proud of, but I had lost another piece of myself. And I've always had a very, very tenuous relationship with my body. Even at my peak performance, I never liked the way I looked. And so recently I was like, okay, I don't like the way I look. I'm going to be honest about that. Right now, I'm less concerned with performance because I don't need it. So what do I do? And I dove into like body composition sort of stuff. And I was like, oh, there's a formula to this. And it's been around forever. And I'm going to get on it. And one of the things that we started talking about was, how much sleep are you getting? Like, who are you hanging out with? What do those people eat and drink? Like, how late do they start dinner? How late how much sleep are they getting? And you start to see, oh shit, there's real, doesn't mean you have to ditch your friends. It just means like, that's where the information of things like sleep and metrics can be really helpful, because it actually points you in different directions. And what I saw was, oh, there's some things that I really need to adjust. But it's not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. It's just, for a specific goal, there's things that you have to do. That's it.
What are some of the adjustments you made?
Well, I started tracking. I started tracking calories and macros, and people are so resistant to this, and I was for so long. And this is one of the central. I'll tie this into the book. I had a lot of stories about my body and about what this would require. And the first story was, I don't have the genetics to look a certain way. That is usually not true. It might require more work to look a certain way for some of us, but most of us are just strictly not genetically disinclined towards something. We might not look like Chris Hemsworth, but a lot of us can get to a very different aesthetic if we're willing to put in the work. So that's story number one. I don't have the genetics. Story number two, I don't have the time. I don't have the time to walk 12,000 steps a day. That's 6 miles. That's 2 hours. I don't have the time for that. That's okay. Story number two. Story number three, I don't have the money. I don't have the money to hire a trainer. I don't have the money to, okay, another story. Story number four, I don't have the discipline to track my macros. It's just not something I can do. I'm just too scattered. My brain is too ADHD. There's 4 very, very powerful stories that I've told, but they are all stories and they're all false. They're all untruths. Story number 1, which I forget which one that was, but anyway, here's the point.
Genetics.
Genetics. Yeah. I have a specific set of genetics that tends to carry a little bit more body fat, and is more easily, and basically I don't eat enough, and I don't eat enough of the right things. Very different than my body can't look a certain way, right? I just don't have the genetics for that. So knowing that I tend to be a little more skinny fat naturally, what are the things that I can adjust, right? What is the specific kind of training that's going to impact my body type the most? What do those calories look like, right? Story number 2, what was it? Tell me. Was it time, or was it, I was walking maybe? Of course I have that time. Look at how much time we spend on our screens. You can walk and be on your screen if that's what you want to do. You might bump into people, don't get hit by a car, but you can walk and do that at the same time. I see plenty of people doing it around here. Story number 3, I don't have the money. Okay, yes, it can be expensive, and you actually don't need to hire a trainer, but you know, gym membership, whatever it is, great. Even if you don't have the money, you can pretty much do all of this at home. So that's a story that's just not true. Story number 4, I don't have the discipline. No, I just haven't practiced the discipline to do this. I have the discipline. All of those things were total bullshit, right? Like in my case, the money thing was, I have money to do it. I was just spending the money differently. I was prioritizing going out and eating out and having, you know, which is fine too. But the story, the idea that I didn't have the money, was patently false. It was just not a true story. And so this gets really, I mean, it's a great allegory for the book, or one of the core tenets of the book is that everything we do, everything is storytelling. From the moment we wake up in the morning to the moment we go to sleep, even to our dreams and the meaning we apply to those dreams, it's all storytelling. That doesn't mean stories are false necessarily, but it's all a story. That's how human consciousness works. We wake up every morning and we tell ourselves a story about who we are and the world we live in and the politics and blah, 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 blah. And they're deeply ingrained. I'm this, I'm that. You know, in my case, I'm mentally ill. I mean, what a story to carry for fucking 40 years. I'm mentally ill. Think about that. But that's a story. It carries with it a value application. Like I'm applying a set of values or a set of judgments to that. And that's so damaging. And so one of the invitations is to examine these stories that we're telling ourselves and potentially reframe them, or just tell a different story. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, completely. In fact, I've you know, I dog-eared many pages of the book, and I had a couple of different quotes here that I would love to discuss with you. And
yeah,
to your point, you know, this is from page 308. I know lots of people who have done ayahuasca 30 times and are still flaming assholes, incapable of sitting with their own pain or that of others. I did laugh out loud when I read that. I do know a few of these people, Cory. And then you said integration means dropping the story because the story no longer informs your actions. And I think a macro question that I have about the process of writing this book is, how do you think about the act of writing this book, sitting with your thoughts, organizing your life in this narrative in relation to integration of story? And you know, your sense of integration of like who I am when I sit and reflect on my synthesis of my life.
Again, great question. The whole writing process, if I can, for me, the way I understand integration, and the reference to integration in that specific paragraph is as it relates to psychedelic therapy and healing, which, by the way, huge proponent of, participate in, all about. So when I'm referring to integration in that context, it's about taking all of the information that we've learned, that we have around our specific life path, our specific life story, and arranging it in a way that promotes the greatest sense of well-being and healing and forward progress, right? And evolution. And so the act of writing this book was, in its own way, one long integrative process. And arriving at the end of it, and I even reference it in the last chapter, there's so much of this that didn't feel, it wasn't that it didn't feel honest, it didn't feel applicable anymore, because the story had been integrated into something new altogether. And the story, ultimately, all the stories I was telling, I had started to step outside of. I had started to leave them behind because
Right.
I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need them to identify, like the story of addiction. And I'm not saying there aren't addicts, by the way, but when we talk about addiction, that is a very, very, very powerful story. When you think about all the stigma that comes along with that. And I identified as an addict for a very long time. And if I'm being honest, in some ways, I thought it made me really special. Look at me, I'm broken. Hey, I've got this story of being an addict. It makes me special. It makes me say, and ultimately, that was one that I was like, am I really that? If you are, by the way, if you feel, if that story keeps you safe, by all means, stick to that story. I want you to stay safe. For me, it was a question of, is that really true? Or have I had very poor impulse control based in specific beliefs and behaviors around myself and painful emotions that I'm unwilling to sit with? And the latter ended up in that. See the difference? Like, I am this, or
Yeah.
I have a specific pattern of behavior. One is immovable and the other is malleable. One keeps us captive, one sets us free, because one leaves room for evolution. Again, if you are an addict, if you're the kind of person, or if that's something that you identify with, and you're the kind of person who has a drink on Friday night and by Monday has no home and is sold the house, you don't need to go down this road. This is just an example, right? Part of the thing that, and I've heard Gabor Mate say something similar, but like, one of the reasons why I eventually stopped going to AA and doing things like that was because I started to see that I was recycling my trauma, right? And I was staying trapped in the story of my trauma. Now, I think AA is one of the most powerful, beautiful, exceptional, helpful organizations in the world. It has helped countless people. And so, all for it. And I think it's really important to note that oftentimes when we continue to tell the story of our trauma, once we've sort of like understood it and accepted it, keeps us trapped in that story. And I say at some point, like, even being a survivor in some ways keeps us chained to our trauma. The idea is to be a victim. You have to be a victim in order to be a survivor. And ultimately, for me, if you can take that big, powerful step, is you don't even need to identify as a survivor anymore, because the original trauma has been integrated and let go of. And the story itself, now it's just something that happened. And it gave you a lot of interesting information as to the way your life works and who you are. And probably if you've done that work, the trauma might have become a huge, huge gift because it led you down that road. Totally different stories.
Completely. I'm going to read something from page 311 that kind of follows up on this thread. So you say, I have a deep need to matter. Much of my life and career has been about exactly that. And the thing that I wondered when I read that, and I wrote this in the margin and came back to it, is how do you see putting this book into the world as related to that part of yourself?
Yeah, it's there's so much meta shit in this, and trust me, I'm like, fuck. Part of me wants to, not put it into the world, because like the exercise, the real value in it is like letting it go. And the irony of putting a story putting a book out into the world that questions the story is that now you've told a story that now you're fucking cemented in some ways, right? Like it's so fucked up. And I think about that. I'm like, shit. Well, now I just wrote a story that I don't even feel totally like I relate to in some ways, but now that's the story that's out there again, you know? And so the work will be not identifying with it, which I don't in some ways. But look, if you want to get into what that specific statement is referring to, is that through a specific set of circumstances and relationships that I had growing up in my family, I questioned and I learned very early on that or at least I felt like, I don't know if I matter, because if I matter, why are these things happening? Right. And it's nobody's fault. I don't blame anybody for it. They were just happening. But at the time, it created a sort of a value deficit. I can't matter if all this shit is going on, like, because if I matter, so I would be protected from this. Right. So spin that forward into later life where you have this value deficit. And so you find ways to be valuable. And so as much as I loved climbing and as much as I loved photography and as much as I thought they were beautiful and I had moments of pure joy in them, I also started leveraging them to prove to people around me that I had value, that I mattered, right? And that's what I'm referring to in that moment. Like it did become a pursuit of like the cult of ego, my own ego. I was drinking my own Kool-Aid. And yet I also knew like, this doesn't, on some core level, I'm like, this is all kind of bullshit. Like, I'm not the best climber in the world. I'm a decent photographer. And yet I'm really leveraging this fame or this, notoriety. I think calling it fame is a little bit much. And then I leveraged it into success. That's not entirely unnatural. It's, that's okay too. Pieces of that are okay. It's when we start to go overboard with it and it becomes sort of, a false flag and we get to hide behind it that it becomes problematic. So a lot of my career was like, as soon as I started getting a little shine to me, like lean into the shine, show it off, but then I got to hide more and more behind that over time.
I know that your dad was really into the Stoics. There's of course like a giant cultural conversation around Stoicism. Great branch of philosophy. I'm a personal fan. And there's a moment, I don't remember which climb this was on, but there's a moment in the book where you're reading one of Ryan Holiday. Reading one of Ryan Holiday's books, and like you're doing one of the things that I think on its face, almost every human on the planet would be like, this is like one of the most courageous things a human being could do. And you're like in a tent reading a Ryan Holiday book. I just thought that was pretty funny, Cory.
Well, I love Stoicism, but I also see, really what I'm a fan of is neo-Stoicism. And I think Stoicism, as it gets presented today, is, and as in its original root, was actually, we know so much more about neuroscience now. Yes, that sort of the highest calling of Stoicism is to be able to observe the emotion and not apply a value system to it. Believe you are not harmed and you will not be harmed, right? That is a beautiful sentiment. It's a wonderful aspiration. And emotions are actually essential to our survival. So when we try to sidestep the emotion, we can't. We actually, our brains don't work that way. That's using the prefrontal cortex, but all of this stuff starts in the amygdala, right? Like that's the emotion processing. The limbic system is how we're using. That's how we're interpreting emotional information around us. So if the amygdala and the limbic system, or specifically if the stress response of emotional processing has not been regulated, your prefrontal cortex, your logic and reason is completely fucking offline. We can't work, from the outside in. It actually comes from the inside out. So we have to integrate our emotional experience and use the information that it's giving us. And only then can we start to examine the stories we're telling about it. Right. And that's sort of the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy too, is like, okay, something happens, we feel an emotion, now let's check the story that drove that emotion. It requires mindfulness, but Stoicism, as it was understood back in the day and as it sort of gets presented now, is not as simple as, I choose not to be scared. Fuck that. You can't do that. You are scared. Start there. Validate that. Now work out into the story that you're telling yourself about being scared. And so Neo-Stoicism incorporates neuroscience and emotional sciences into the broader concepts of Stoicism. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Let's get more meta in this moment.
Yeah.
When you sat down, and the process of, as you describe it in the book, no spoilers, but a bit of a spoiler, you kind of like start writing the book. During the narrative of the book, you began writing the book, or you talk about like, I've started to like write some pages. It's now become this thing that you're reading and so on. And now, here we go. We've got this amazing book, which is a highly impressive work of literature that I greatly enjoyed. When you sat down at the outset, you were at this period of great transition in your life, and you had no way of knowing that it would end up being this thing. And we're doing this several months before the book will be released. We're going to release this interview very proximate to the release of the book. And I have this feeling it's going to be wildly successful. And like, you're going to be talking to Terry Gross and all over the place again. But how did you feel in that moment when you sat down to do this? Did you sit down with confidence, and did you have foreknowledge of what it might become? Was there fear? How did you feel?
You want the real story? I'll give you the real story.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, let's do it.
I was bored. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where I was going. I had no direction. And I honestly, I moved to LA. I had left climbing, I had left photography, and I had this very public it was a mixed bipolar. They catalog it as a mixed bipolar episode at the base camp of Dhaulagiri. And it seemed crazy to everybody. And it kind of was. I was like, I'm moving to LA. I want to make films. And everybody's like, dude, what the fuck, man? Like we can't keep track of this shit. Even my parents, and no ill will there. And so I came out and I was learning about writing scripts, and I was like, okay, I'm going to write a script. So I started the script that was kind of, it's actually a great story, and then I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't feel quite right. And then, so I was like, I was reminded to write what you know. So I was like, oh, well, I'll just use this as sort of an interesting, could I write a script about a life that looks like mine, right? Not about my life necessarily, but about like, could I use my lived experience to do something interesting? So start with that. And like, that doesn't feel right. And then it was like, Cory, just write a fucking book. Like, just write about your life. Just stop trying to make it a thing. Or at first it wasn't even, try to write a book. I mean, that came pretty shortly after, but it was like, oh, I think maybe I should just write about my life and see what happens. And that's when it started taking form. And there's a huge thing that happens when people write memoirs that everybody, like, I think almost all memoir, like authors who write memoirs are going to go, there's a point of fear, a deep point of fear where you're questioning and you're going, is this just so fucking self-serving? Like, why does my story matter? That's so fucking, you walk into a bookstore and it's just lined with shelves of it, and you're just like, mine doesn't matter. Like, it's just another fucking book. Like, and so there's fear that you're going to be rejected, that your story doesn't matter, that you're not going to finish. There's all this fear around it. At least there was for me. There was a lot of fear and insecurity. And then there was also sort of the contrary deep knowing of like, everybody, and I believe this, everybody's story matters because they help us relate. They tie us together. They help, think of all the books that you've read that have, like, have helped you through a time of darkness or a time of light, that have inspired you. If that person thought their story didn't matter and they didn't write the book, you wouldn't have had that shepherd in the dark, right? Like you wouldn't have had that. So I just kept writing. And then some chapters started leaking out that where I was like, oh, this is, and then I engaged some people and said, hey, what do you think? And then you start gathering momentum. But again, it took 1.5 years before I actually put together a book proposal. I just wanted somebody to do it for me. Nobody was going to do that for me.
And the book it's highly structurally sophisticated. And is that the way it came out, or did that structure emerge over time? And just to give you one, for example, or perhaps a few things that I noticed, like there's a discussion early on in the book with your dad,
Mm-hmm.
which I wrote down and now of course can't find. But anyway, at the beginning of the book, you're talking to your dad about physics, and you're talking
Matter.
about you're talking about matter. And then
Yeah.
I saw symmetry between that conversation and kind of your experiences at the end of the book related to inner being and
Mm-hmm.
like what we can learn from the practice of meditation. So like there's the birth scene at the beginning, like you kind of
Mm-hmm.
recount your birth, the umbilical cord, and then at the end there's the umbilical cord of the purple rope that bound you
Mm-hmm.
to your climbing teammates and the
Mm.
survival of the avalanche. So, and then in the middle, I'm not going to spoil it, but like there's
Yeah.
an event that's kind of, like that provides this really interesting symmetrical frame, and there's almost this mirroring from beginning to end. So did you set out to construct it in that manner, or did that emerge through editing and kind of reshuffling things?
I wish I was that smart. Um, but also, it didn't emerge through editing. It ended up being the way I wrote the book.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
yeah, it just was the way I wrote it. What I was clear on is that, and as some of the social media that I've been putting out around the release, one of the things I'm doing is like book reports because I think books are awesome. And what I was very clear on is that like there's, and I didn't read this till after the book, but if anybody's interested, it's called Wired for Story by Lisa Crone. I don't know how to say her last name, Crone. It's brilliant. And then I think even more seminal to the way I understand story is Joseph Campbell and, Hero with a Thousand Faces, The Hero's Journey. And specifically, my favorite book of his is The Power of Myth. And I knew that great stories are all structured basically the same, right? And so I have mine divided literally into 3 acts, or part 1, part 2, part 3. You could think of them as 3 acts. And they follow a narrative structure of the basic story that the hero's journey operates on, right? And it's the basic structure of every film we watch. It's formulaic. And it's not because I was trying to achieve a film structure, it's because that's the way our brain understands story best, right? The hero, the protagonist, is called to journey, right? Something happens. And it could be an internal thing, it could be an external thing, right? But something happens and there's an invitation that invites them out. And then they either take the invitation or they don't. And of course, you take the invitation. And that's when you get into, that's the end of act 1 in any film. Then you get into, like in a film structure, what people have called the fun and games section. And then you start speeding up and you go through life and you like things are clicking. And then there's a halfway point right at the center where something cataclysmic or something marvelous happens. And it changes the trajectory, right? But as soon as that happens, even if it's cataclysmic or marvelous, shit starts to unravel, right? And it gets really, 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 really hard, really, 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 really dark until right at the end where you break into that 3rd act or section 3, where it's the dark night of the soul, all is fucked up. And then there's a moment where you're at the protagonist is at their lowest, in which they are forced into reconciliation with the problem that they are trying to solve internally, that they've been trying to do externally through most of the, the whole story. And then there's a switch and it happens. And the only gift I had was I actually noticed in my life this switch that was happening, where I was like, oh shit, everything's fallen apart. What's happening? So then I started being very aware of like the change that was taking place. And a lot of people think like the plot is a story, and this is from Lisa's book. Like, the plot is not the story. The story is what happens, is how the protagonist transforms throughout. That's the story. And the theme is what overwrites that. And the plot are just the things that happen, basically. So anyway, that's a little granular, but I'm obsessed with how we tell stories. And the structural, thank you for that. Like, the structural basis of this was both thoughtful and reflexive, because it just made sense to me to write the book that way without thinking about it. That's just how it came out.
Did you always know you would start with the scene that opens the book?
No, I didn't know. But I'm happy I did. It made sense to do it that way. And I also think I could have ended that scene before I did. I was thinking about that today. I was like, well, what if I left it as more of a cliffhanger? But then it is the way it is, and it's an invitation, and I like that because it sort of lays out the premise for the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a fantastic place to start. Always good to start in the middle of the action.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely. And we talked a little bit about your physical transformation through the writing process and what happened afterwards. What was your experience of becoming deeply immersed in the practice of writing? And I mean, it's highly conscious as opposed to meditation, which is a different way of sitting down. But what have you learned about yourself from being a writer in a more committed way than you've ever been?
Again, these stories of, oh, I'm ADHD, I can't focus. It's a story. Actually, I can have laser focus if I set up the framework. And so what I've realized is I need framework. I need accountability. I need a plan. If I don't have a plan in place, which, by the way, I don't do all the time, and it's still something that I'm navigating. I'm really working with. It's like I'm growing up at 43. I'm like, oh fuck, this is what growing up means. But what I realize is there's this story that like, oh, I can't, I could never do that. Well, if you put the system in place and you put all the pieces around yourself, you can pretty much do anything. It's just structure. So I learned again that was a story that was false. I'm ADHD. I don't have the discipline to do this. Again, and that's part of where one of the things that we talked about on the other podcast is like this idea of presence, where I felt very, very, there were days where I felt like almost manic in the writing process, and it felt so good to have this coming out. It just felt so good because I was engaging with creative flow. But like you point out, it's not presence. It's very different than that. But being in flow for hours on end is a marvelous, marvelous experience. And the more you do that, the more able you are to return to it, because again, you've set the systems in place.
Has your relationship with how you tell stories on social media changed at all as a consequence of becoming more deeply immersed in writing?
Honestly, I mean, I want to say yes, but the truth is, social media to me is, I love everybody. Thank you if you follow me. Like, I thank you. Like, you really are making my life possible, and I appreciate it so much. And I really struggle with social media because I understand and see holistically what it's doing to us. There are positive benefits to it, unquestionably, and there's a lot of this mindlessness that's taking place, that's eating our attention, that's taking us outside of the amazing experience of life. And so I have a strained relationship with it. Um, I think it's made me more mindful of what I put on social media rather than just being reactive. Oh, I have to feed the algorithm. I want to talk about more interesting things. Of course, like in this moment, you got to sell the book, and that's part of commerce. And there's, thank God that we have it to be able to do those things. That's just a reality. But like, how do I create content that is, I think, a little bit more meaningful? Um, I think we did that with Everest No Filter, where we were actually trying to do something interesting with the medium. And so approaching it that way, like, okay, this is a fascinating medium. What can I do with it? That becomes a more interesting question. But like, I don't love social media. It's not my favorite thing.
Yeah, and you mentioned Everest No Filter, and you write about it in the book, and I think you actually talk about some version of this, but it's like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which is once you observe something, you've changed it more or
Yeah.
less, right?
Yeah.
And so you also mentioned you have another book, and then I imagine there's another book after that that you might be working on now that you're not talking about. Do you want to talk about it?
Well, there is a book in my head that I'm working on, but I haven't started. Haven't put any pen to paper. The book that comes after The Color of Everything, which comes out in July, that's the memoir, is the photo book, and that is Coffee Table. It's by 10 Speed Press, which is an imprint of Random House. And that's a fun one because it leans into mental health in a fun way. In fact, it organizes my entire career through the lens of the heart and the brain, which I think, it's pretty clever. It's fun anyway. And I'm really excited about that. It's less, it's not a big personal story. But it's my life through photographs, essentially. And the third book is, without saying too much, I think I have a lot of ideas about. Well, I'm not. Yeah, we've talked about it, but I'm not going to actually specifically say what it is. Yeah,
Good.
I'll
Yeah.
like leave an Easter egg for people.
No, that's great. And one of the things that I've gotten back into in the past couple of weeks, Cory, is I've gotten really into reading physical books again. And,
Mm.
I'm a dad. I've got two young kids, and like a lot of people, I've got a lot of stuff going on. I've always loved to read. And something that I've been doing more often is just completely shutting my phone off, not reading on a Kindle. And I've been reading physical books more. I even got a dorky light that I wear around my neck. So I can wear my blue black glasses and not have overhead light on and have my
Yeah.
weird light thing. So my kids make fun of me all the time. But I just wanted to say thanks, because as a consequence of this interview, for the first time in years, I read a 354-page book in a week, or in 5 days, I think, which I definitely wouldn't have done. And I loved every minute of it. It's a fantastic book. I'm really excited to see, where this journey takes you next. And I guess the last thing that I would ask is actually a request, because I know once people read the book, once they listen to this interview, the thing they're going to ask is, can you have Cory Richards and Andre Agassi on for a future episode of Choose the Hard Way? So I don't know if you guys are friends, but this is an open invitation. I know this book's going to
Uh,
totally blow up. You very modestly described yourself as not famous. You're super famous. You're going to become even more famous. And this is an open invitation. I'd like to have you and Agassi on the show, maybe fall 24. Will you do it?
I would love to, I would actually adore that. And I will say this, if Andre ever hears this, we're not friends, but I Andrew right now is hinting at something that I say in the book. One of the best books I read, and one of the books that really set me off on my journey, was Andre Agassi's book Open. I am not a tennis player. I am but reading that book, and the way he wrote, and the way he described tennis, the way he described his life, even though I had no idea what it meant to be a tennis player, I could relate to everything in relationship to my life. And one of the things that he writes throughout the book which was so fascinating to me, which I just hit so hard, was I hate tennis. So Andre's book was seminal in my process, and I cannot extend him enough gratitude. And yeah, I rib him a little bit in my book, but I would love to be on a podcast with him, if for no other reason than just to say thank you over and over and over again for the profound privilege I had of reading his words.
It's a fantastic book. I love that book as well. And I also want to know what is in the gill water for anyone who read the book. I don't know if you remember that, but his trainer would color his recovery and electrolyte drinks to be like, today I got an orange gill water. I'm like, man, I want to know what's in the gill water, dude. Come on the show. I can see what's in the gill water, man. We all want to sip. Awesome. Well, Cory, thanks so much. Thanks so much for being here and being so generous with your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's so psyched to do this. Let's do it again.